So we're celebrating America's 250th anniversary this year. And I remember when we had the bicentennial. Raise your hand. No, don't raise your hand. Don't admit it. Okay, but I do remember the bicentennial. It's hard to believe we're now at 250 years of our country. And so these songs are reflective of music about our country, things that you probably are familiar with, but some things you are not familiar with. And that's intentional. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And a little bit of poetry, because there's some very famous poems about the founding of our country, about the history. So we got a little bit of that woven in this as well. So we're going to start with something called Star Spangled Spectacular. This was by George M. Cohan. Now that's not for the Revolutionary period. He was the beginning of the last century guy, song and dance man, Broadway, etc. But there's some great old songs in there. Is I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy and you're a grand old flag. That's a nice toe tapper, isn't it? Yes. When you just kind of want to get up and march around with it. The next one, only part of the orchestra is playing it. It's an interesting song. It's called Liberty Song. Anybody know it? Can you hum it? No. Would you believe this was the second most popular song in the colonies at one time? It was published in the newspaper. And it's a melody that they stole from the British. Surprise, surprise. But it's not a very British song. Because John Dickinson, who was part of the Continental Congress and all that, he penned the words to this song. And it was the first protest song against the British, and it was published in the newspaper. I bet there were some people not happy with John Dickinson. Basically, it says, to come join in hand, Americans all. and rouse your hearts at liberty's call. And it goes on talking about, you know, how basically the British are taxing us. What happened because we got mad about that? The Boston Tea Party, right? And one of the lines in here is that our purses are ready. Well, they'll spend their money on supporting the revolution, but not on the taxes to the British. And he says, you know, but we're free men with our money. So it's a direct song towards the taxation by the British on the colonists who felt that this was an unfair tax because they had no representation. So this was a very popular song in the colonies, and you've probably never heard it in your life, and neither did I till I found it. So here we go. You got to at least listen to it, because it reminds me of Gilbert and Sullivan, of all the guys singing, because this was a song from the Navy. He stole it. Okay, put his own words to it. You ready? We're just going to do. I'm actually going to sing it today. His voice isn't working. You ready? Just play the first note. You know, but that was a very popular song during the beginning of the Revolution. And frankly, it's not a very memorable melody, so I think I kind of know why we don't know it today. But a little bit of history of our country. And of course, there's been a lot of writings from people of that time and people later on that wish to honor the Revolution, honor those people that made it happen. And there's a really long poem called Paul Revere's Ride. How many of you know about Paul Revere? Yeah. Okay. Of course, history has kind of done a disservice to that ride because there were actually 3 of them who rode that night. Paul got remembered, you know, one of the signers of the Declaration and all that. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a very long poem about this. The original poem goes on for 4 pages. I promise I'm not reading you 4 pages of his poem. But this is, some people know it as the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, but this actually was called Paul Revere's Ride. So his poem goes like this. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the old North Church tower as a signal light. If by land, and 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. Now you know the rest, in books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock on the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will awaken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. And if you want to read the whole poem, it just goes into a lot more details, and I didn't think we really wanted 4 pages of poetry here. So, but I think it is a great poem, and it's one I remember as a child learning that poem. Well, you heard the wonderful fiddling group we had here, Jim's Red Pants. Now, we're not as good as them on fiddling, but we are going to play Arkansas Traveler. It's a fiddling tune that came later in our country, but all that whole history of fiddling comes out of the colonial period. And I said, all the fiddlers on the ships and all the tunes that they brought with them. And this was written later, and so we just thought we'd play you our version of Arkansas Traveler, so they got a chance to do a little fiddling here. called Songs of the Nation. Now, it has a lot of songs, and we're actually not playing the whole piece. But we took some of the more interesting parts of it. The first song is a song called Hail Columbia. Columbia was often used in reference to our country. And it was originally from 1789 and was played at the inauguration of George Washington for president. It sounds very much like that very stately kind of music you would have heard for a very official kind of ceremony. And then it does a little brief segue into Battle Hymn of the Republic, of course, which comes during Civil War times. But then there's one more in here that we're going to play, and it is called The Red, White, and Blue. You may recognize the melody. Some people called it Hail Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean was another term for it. But this is from 1843, which is a little later, but it at one time was our unofficial national anthem. And you'll probably hear a part in here where you might recognize where it goes, all hail Lord the red, white, and blue, da-da-da. So you'll hear that in here. But just very historic songs that have different points in our country, and some may be familiar, and some not. Walking in there all dressed to be inaugurated in that first one. Sounds very much very patriotic, just, you know, music from that era. I'm going to do a little more poetry for you if you have a guest. So Mitch. Okay. There he is. I'm looking along back there. So So he's going to tell you a little bit about the poem he is reading for you. And this is the whole thing because it's not real long. So come on up here.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a poem, Concord Hymn, written and recited by Ralph Waldo Emerson on the occasion of the dedication of the monument at the North Bridge in Concord, Massachusetts, a battle that took place on the first day of the Revolutionary War. The date of the dedication was a good 60 years after the battle, and the North Bridge had since been washed away after a flood. At the time of the dedication, there was no bridge there. But there is now. They reproduced it, replicated it exactly as it was. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here, once, the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. The foe, long since in silence slept, alike the conqueror's silent sleeps. In time, the ruined bridge was swept down the dark stream that seaward creeps. On this green bank, by this soft stream, we set today a votive stone, that memory may their deeds redeem, when, like our sires, our sons are gone. Spirit that made those heroes dare to die and leave their children free, bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee.
So now we're going to play some tunes for you here from this piece called The American Frontier. The Girl I Left Behind Me, which is a really, really old tune. And then Chester, which was the second most popular song in the colonies after Yankee Doodle. We're going to play some Old Susanna, which, who wrote Old Susanna? It's not really a folk song.
Foster.
Stephen Foster. Do you know he lived in Cincinnati? And wrote most of his songs in Cincinnati? Yeah, how about that? And then Shenandoah, which is another lovely tune. And finally it ends with America the Beautiful. people to help you figure it out over there.